Live with Build Your Brand, sponsored by Restream. If you want to check it out, go ahead and check out this awesome link. It's a great way to stream across so many platforms. In fact, right now, I will say one of the coolest things is we're streaming live on Twitter, Twitch, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, just a million platforms. And today, I am extra excited because we have a super special guest with us, and that's Monica, otherwise known as Thundercup. Monica, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, guys. So I am a marketing and brand strategist. I've worked with plenty of different brands, mostly in fashion. And I currently am the brand manager for a women's beachwear apparel line. Yeah.
Amazing. So Monica has worked a ton in what I consider a really interesting sector of especially Instagram brands. So, and that's streetwear and that's fashion. So Monica, can you give us let's start off with the easy thing. So what do you think of when you are building a fashion brand from scratch on Instagram? What are the first things you need to do?
Well, it's funny that you bring that up because right now, my current job right now is to rebrand. So it's very different from building a brand from scratch. So I think building a brand from scratch, I am a total believer in kind of like a slow, organic growth, because I feel like that is the most impactful long term, especially because people do, I think a lot of people nowadays really worry about their image and when they're launching a brand, and they want to kind of launch with a lot of fanfare and make a lot of noise right away. But, I think people really actually like to see the growth from when you had, kind of your beginner designs or pieces, versus maybe a few years later, you have a full-on collection. And so I think, what's really important for me is to really just start where you are, and, don't stress too much about, reaching to the level of like perfection before launching, and really know like what your brand is and who you're catering to and what story you're trying to tell is really important.
And I think that's so good. Starting with what story are you trying to tell and who are you catering to? I feel like these are kind of like the two basic tenets of whenever you're building, or for, in your case, rebuilding, rebranding an existing brand. And since we're talking about rebranding, which I do think is super interesting, how do you take, say, customers or audience members who are already invested and interested in a brand that exists? How do you gently guide them through something like a rebrand and keep them or lose them, I guess?
I think it obviously varies for every situation, but I think that you really have to first, I think anyone, whether you are in a situation where you want to rebrand your brand, or you're helping someone else rebrand their brand, whether it's a client or it's your in-house, you really have to understand like where, and kind of do an audit of where everything is at right now. Like, who are the customers right now? And what are you guys doing right now? And what are the pain points like right now? Then from there, you kind of can have a better understanding of where everything's at currently, and then you plan, what's coming next. And I think that once you gain a good understanding, you also, as you're learning more and more about it, you will pick up on things that you may notice and say, okay, these are things that I see areas of improvement in these areas. So, I think that it's also important to keep in mind that it's a process, and I think that it's hard for even me to come in and say, okay, this is going to take time. I personally, I like to see changes immediately. So I'm always like, okay, I want to, step on the gas, but a lot of these things take time. And I think that you have to still stay true to the brand, but take what it is currently and then really evolve it. So if you think about the world's most iconic brands, for example, like Nike, or, even Lululemon, which is a bit of a newer brand, in comparison. I think that you've seen it go from something and then the next phase and then the next phase and then what it is currently. And everyone has started somewhere. So I think you have to allow that growth and really evolve what it is now, and think about, how can I think outside of the box? How can I better tell my story? How can I really take it to the next level? I think those are all things to think about when you're rebranding.
Yeah, and I like that you said it takes time to do a rebrand. I think a lot of people think, okay, well, I'll do a rebrand, we'll relaunch with a new logo, new colors, new graphics, etc. We'll just throw it all out there and then we're done. But it takes time to get your existing customers used to your new brand, but also it takes time to pull in new folks, that new, I guess, target demographic of people and customers that you are trying to focus on. So I think it is very, very helpful and very wise to think about a rebrand as a slower process where you really have to work with the entire team, of course, of the company or the brand to really get it going. So thank you, everybody, for joining in on this live stream today. Today, we're talking with Monica about building your brand, specifically building it on Instagram and other platforms that allow for really showing off growth for fashion brands, which I think, once again, is a super interesting concept to think about and a super interesting vertical. So Monica, obviously Instagram isn't the only place you're going to grow a fashion brand, but maybe it's one of the most focused places. What are some other social platforms that you've been looking at more lately?
I think obviously a lot of, everyone's been talking about TikTok, and I think TikTok is a place where people are still trying to figure out, how do I, monetize on TikTok? How do I advertise on TikTok? And I think the interesting about TikTok is that they actually show, like the rankings of the highest performing ads in different categories. So if you are if you're a food brand, you can go in and check like what are the highest performing food brand ads, or if you are a fashion brand, you can check that as well. So I think that that's really, really insightful. That is a bit of a differentiator from other platforms. And I always tell people this because this is a little bit of a, it's not what traditionally people think of as like social media, but Reddit is a really great platform too, especially if you are the founder or CEO, and you are, or really like any leadership role in the company or for the brand, because that is so different from Instagram, right? Instagram is like very visual. TikTok's also very visual. And it's a limited, but Reddit is pretty much, there are photos, but it's mostly text. And that's a place where people can do, AMAs, and they can ask these people anything that they want, and you get a better, you get a better look at the brand that you wouldn't be able to on like a TikTok or like Twitter or Instagram. So I think that builds like an even deeper relationship with customers. And if you go on Reddit, I don't know if you use Reddit at all, but if you go on Reddit, every day there's like probably millions of suggestions flying around where people are asking, hey, what are some good dog treat brands? What are some good footwear brands? Like, where do you guys buy boots? Like people are passing information back and forth, and a lot of the suggestions are really valuable because they are essentially like self-regulated, because people are upvoting and downvoting the posts. I guess like in some situations that might not be the best, but for the most part, it is great, just because people are really, really good at regulating. If it seems like someone from the brand is coming to promote it, they know right away that it's not authentic. And I think that people, have developed a level of like trust with each other given that context, because they're able to feel like that people who give recommendations on Reddit, it's reliable and it's not
right.
an ad, or it's not someone who works for the brand saying, no, yes, come use this, because they can see right through that. So
I love this pro tip for Reddit, which is if you have an executive or a leader for your brand, to have them be on Reddit sharing information, because ironically, it's more transparent to have a leader do an AMA or have somebody who's running the brand do those questions and answers, because then they know that they're from the brand and they're not just somebody being like, you like boots? I love this brand. And it's so obvious it's a branded post. And Reddit, just like so many other social platforms, can sniff it out. But I love these other two examples of platforms. We have TikTok and Reddit, and we also have our first question on rebranding, Monica. So I'm going to throw this one over to you. I'll put it up on the live. Thank you for this live chat. What are some tips and strategies for rebranding, going from serving young professionals to now serving all ages? How can we engage our audience better? Monica, I'll let you answer this one.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think that it's probably not something I can answer in this live stream completely. But I think on a high level, definitely you have to have already a good understanding of what your brand is, which doesn't mean that you can't, think outside of the box and turn it into something that's essentially next level. But understanding like the core and who your current customers are, which you say is young professionals, and then pivoting to serve now then all ages. Like what is the value that you're bringing to these other demographics, right? And I think you need to understand what would be valuable to them and where they're consuming content and what kind of content they like. So I think all ages is extremely broad. So my suggestion would be to kind of tackle it kind of piece by piece. If you look at a lot of the really successful brands, they've always kind of captured a very specific demographic first before expanding, because they really like own that. So, and I have no context like what kind of brand this is or anything like that, but if you have successfully, really dominated that demographic of young professionals, when you're, you would take some of the similar philosophies of like how you own that demographic and think about how you can own these other demographics and really expand the audience. But I think that it's still, it, like we were talking about earlier, it's still something that you should plan out in phases and maybe not all like, hello, we're here for everyone now. I think that's very, very difficult to say that you are for everyone. I think that even the most popular brands in the world still have a more specific target. So you definitely should pay attention to that.
So I think it's just like we were talking about before. So instead of trying to roll out to everyone all at once, start with that really focused, narrow demographic first. If you, like Monica said, dominate that amazing demographic and you're so wonderful at that one small demographic, or I guess giant demographic of young professionals, then you can move on to a slightly larger demographic that maybe includes one age group up, below or above, I guess, and then move from there.
Right. You can also continue targeting, like if you've really owned young professionals, again, that's a little bit broad too, because we don't know, is it like, are they like young, like Gen Z professionals or millennials? Like anyways, that's like one thing to think about, but then also like you have to figure out, okay, in which ways am I targeting these other demographics too? You may not have to completely switch off of young professionals, right? You can change like how you target your ads, or you can change for paid channels. It's different than like organic, but you are still thinking of the same strategies and using the same type of voice, but they may have a little bit of different interests, or they may spend money a little bit differently. So you need to like think about those things and appeal to that. I think in a lot of places, a lot of companies like to think about their targets in the form of like personas or muses. So you can also think about that too. Like who are some people that they could be real people or fictional people that represent those demographics that you're now trying to go after, and how would you appeal to them?
I love this. Let's go into some marketing 101 right now with personas. So not everyone knows, Monica, unfortunately, what you mean when you said that. I do. So let's make up a persona right now. So let's say Joe is a young professional. What other characteristics might we attribute to this particular persona?
Yeah, he could be. So if he's a young professional, you know, you can also think about what kind of like area does he live in? Does he live in the suburbs? Does he live in an urban area? Also, like how does he, you know, what kind of income he makes for his household? Does he have kids? Um, you know, what his spending habits are, what does he like to do for fun. All of these things are all great insights for a brand to know. And if you want to have a good understanding of your current customer base, you definitely should know these things. You know, who makes up the majority of who if Joe is the persona, you know, you should learn as much about Joe as you can. Like what area in the world does he most likely to live in, right? What would he most likely do for fun on the weekends if it wasn't the pandemic? And how often does he travel? And like all of these things definitely go into play too.
And I think this is so helpful. So let's just say we made Joe a young dad with one kid, a family. They earn roughly in the six figures region, and they live in the America Northwest. So that's already assigning a ton of stuff. And normally Joe likes to hike outdoors with his family. Actually, he might still be doing that right now during the pandemic. But we also might have another persona. Let's just call her Mary. And Mary is a divorced mom, and she's older. And her spending habits and her income, et cetera, are different. So that's how we want to think when we're thinking about something like personas, is it's actually not the same. So Joe is not exactly the same as Mary. That's why we do different personas. Now, you probably don't want to have something crazy like 12 personas, because that's too many personas. In fact, Monica, how many personas would you think just the regular brand should have?
I think that if you are a brand that is kind of like the question from earlier, that's trying to target like a very wide audience, I think a handful would be good. So like 5 would probably be a good number. Just because, you know, I think if this is something, if you are rebranding, it's not good to go super wide and have like 20 personas. I think that would be a little bit crazy, because then you don't really have a focus, right? And I think that, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, you know, you can have customers that are very broad, even if your target is more narrow. So if you think about a brand like Glossier, which is like a really successful beauty brand, and it mostly targets, the aesthetic that it targets is definitely Gen Z, right? And it's a direct-to-consumer brand. They're not carried in retailers like Sephora and Ulta. Everything they do is direct-to-consumer. And if you look at, you know, they opened a store here in LA, and it's actually since then has closed due to the pandemic. But before that, there would always be a line outside, and there would always be so many different people there of all ages, like women of all ages mostly, and different aesthetics, different, you know, ethnicities. So even though they are targeting Gen Z, a soccer mom has no problem going to shop there either, because she likes what the brand, you know, the products, she likes what it stands for, she likes the aesthetics. So it's not you're not necessarily like alienating anyone just by, you know, not targeting them as well.
So this is the best part about having a really strong focused brand, is that you can attract people that are not in your personas because your brand is so clear. So that's why I think it's so nice to have a clear brand to really work on focusing down instead of expanding out when you start. We have a great question from my friend. I'm going to drop it right here. When you're starting with your smaller audience, and start expanding from there? Is this something that you usually plan ahead of time or just have happen to you? Of course, you can always adjust your plans when you go, but
Oh, sorry. I can't see the rest of the question. Let me see it on the side. But I'm wondering how much planning, prepping you already do before you actually expand to your audience. So I think this is a really interesting question because it's not like it's, again, a lot of the stuff when it comes to branding is not one size fits all, but there are things that you should think about when you are launching on a certain platform and you have 0 to a small audience, right? And I think that some of the things you can plan ahead are, okay, what content am I going to launch with? What voice am I going to, what is this, what value is this going to bring to people? So if you're a service, that's easy, right? You should know what your service is and who you're targeting and what value you're bringing to people in that way. Or if you're a beauty brand, who are you targeting? What kind of value is your content bringing? Like, are they tutorials? Are they inspirational looks? Or, there's so many different ways you can bring value to people, or could it be a combination of both? So those are things you need to think about when you're not just like getting on Instagram just to get on Instagram and say, hey guys, I'm here. And I think that's like a very common misconception just about marketing in general, where you're like, hey, if I open up the business, people will know about it, they'll come buy from us. But that's not necessarily the case. And even if you do have a lot of money to spend on marketing, that's also not necessarily, a ticket to success either. So definitely think about, what value am I bringing? What story am I telling? Like, what voice am I telling it in? I think those are things you need to think about. And think about, hey, how do I be consistent? I think the key to social media, not just Instagram, but really any social media platform. And I think that we all, I mean, not we all, but many of us have had friends who joined TikTok at the beginning of the pandemic and have now blown into they're like internet famous now, right? And I think the common thread is that they are consistent. So even if they started at 5 followers or 10, 100, 500, they were consistent in building their content, and they consistently built they were like, okay, for example, if they wanted to put out content that would make people feel good or laugh, right? They kind of thought about what are different ways I can make people laugh and keep putting out that content, and they were consistent with it. So if you're going to post, once a week, try that out. Or if you want to post once a day for throughout the week, that's something else to try out. But as long as you're consistent, even when it comes to a platform like YouTube, the YouTubers who are really successful post on a regular schedule. So if someone comes, if you're starting on the platform and I discover and I'm like, oh, I really like this, I'm going to want to see more from you, right? And it may not always have to be the same type of content, but it should be within your character and your story, and I would want to see more of that. Now, if you are launching with something like super interesting or you go viral for something, that's great, but how do you have to still think about, the planning ahead part is like, how do I continue that? And how do I continue bring that same value? And there's not necessarily a way for people to ever really predict, is this going to go viral, or am I going to get tons of followers off of this one post or this piece of content?
I'm laughing so hard because I think both Monica and I know people who have blown up, for lack of a better word, if you don't want to use the viral word, on whatever platform they're on. And they might have one huge video or one huge week of content that did amazingly well, and then their whole brand has to actually change to accommodate that. But what I love, what Monica is saying here, is the consistency side. So even if, say, you become famous for riding a skateboard and drinking cranberry juice to a certain song, I hope you all know what TikTok video I'm referring to, you now have to create consistent content that makes sense with that. So maybe you're always skateboarding now in your videos. Maybe you're always drinking ocean spray in your videos. Oops, I said the brand name. Maybe you always play that one song. You have to find that line of consistency. Monica, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think that for some reason that he's now an influencer, but originally he was just like a regular guy.
But he was just a guy
on skateboard. And I think that's a great example, because I don't think he didn't necessarily like expect to go viral or anything, but people really latched onto it because they're like, well, look at this guy. He's carefree, drinking cranberry juice, like a brand that everyone knows. He's on a skateboard. He's just having a great time. And so now I think he has continued it because he has made a lot more like skateboard drinking stuff content, right? But he's also got with the right people. And I think a lot of influencers and different brands and influencers have hit him up and said, hey, let's do something together. So he's kind of continued that same, he's continued to tell his story, and it's true to him, but just in different ways now. Now he's kind of evolved it into something else. So I think that's something that everyone can think about, because, if you have something that's worked really well for you, that's great. And then you think, okay, this has worked so well. What are ways I can kind of build on this and make it even better, or do something that people may not expect, but, they already like my brand. So let me do some more things that kind of, they're like, oh, this is kind of unexpected, but I really like this. So I think that one of the things that I've kind of like been thinking about lately is that, I've been on Instagram for a little while now, and I've seen it kind of evolve throughout the years, and just even with like Instagram and Facebook becoming, under one company, and the algorithm changes throughout the years, and all of that. I think that now, if you watch a puppy video and you refresh your, explore page, there's going to be more puppy videos. So the algorithm,
a lot of puppy videos.
Right. It went from like one puppy video to like the whole feed is puppy videos, right? And so I think it's really interesting, just because like TikTok is such a successful platform, because, the algorithm works differently, and you do see things that you may have searched for before, but you also see things that are totally unexpected, and you're like, I've never seen this. This is really cool. So I think that in that same way, although you can't control the Instagram algorithm, sometimes think about things that may also pique your audience's interest, that may be different, a little bit different than what has worked well for you in the past already. So I think that, you always, in order to build a brand and build the foundation, you have to be consistent. But then in order to evolve the brand or rebrand, you have to think a little bit outside of the box and think, what's something that they would like but not expect. I think that's like a good way to think about it.
I love that we're getting an entire textbook lesson. Monica, I'm going to ask you to stay on a couple extra minutes because we have another question. So let's have this be our last question we're going to answer. I'm going to rephrase this a little bit. Which tools do you use to help guide and inspire your content based on an industry?
So it depends on like what industry. There are so many out there. And I think when it comes to content, it's good to get inspiration, but it's also good to really learn. Many people are surprised seeing different YouTube tutorials on like how to use Instagram stories, right? And I think it's easy to not realize there are so many different features that you just had no idea about. So I think one of the things that I would do is really learn how to use it, and then learn what are creative ways to use it, because you can look at brands all day long, which is totally fine, right? Some brands are great at like staying on top of it. They have great ideas. They use the features and tools in a really innovative way. So I think that's like an easy way to get inspiration, is to look at other brands. But in order to stand out and do things differently, you have to do what they're doing in a better or more creative way, or you have to come up with your own way of using, these different features and tools. So I guess it's kind of like my answer is kind of like twofold. So one, you can look up some different brands that are kind of aspirational to you, or that you look up to, you know, and you feel are successful in your industry. See what they're doing, see what are ways that are successful for them to, you know, get content out there, and what works well for them. But then, you know, the second part of it is also really get to know what platforms you're using and think of creative ways to use them.
So I think the answer here is that there are no magical tools that will solve every single problem across social media platforms. And honestly, the best way to learn or to leverage these platforms is to actually get into the weeds and really do it yourself and learn and watch YouTube videos, or I guess Instagram videos, TikTok videos, about how to make better content.
I think part of being successful on social media is being able to try different things and being able to be as engaging as possible. And I think that lately, before, you know, back in the day, everyone cared about likes and comments, right? And now people are discovering, hey, I think the algorithm is favoring saves and shares a lot more now, which makes so much sense, because if your content is valuable to people or inspirational to people, they will save it and they will share it, right? So I think when you're creating content, think about it in that way. What is something that you've seen that you're like, oh, I have to share this? You know, if I see something like a meme or even an ad or anything like that, I'm like, oh, I have to share this with Goldie. Or what are some things that, you know, you've seen that you're like, oh, I'm gonna bookmark this or screenshot this or save it to my saved images and make a folder for it because I think this looks great. It could be anything from, you know, I don't know, there's so many different industries, but it could be anything from home decor to jewelry to makeup looks to, you know, there's all these different things, or even inspirational quotes. You know, people have different boards for different things. And I think that even kind of like taking inspiration cross-platform is helpful too, because look at the types of things that people save on their Pinterest boards, or look at the types of things that people, you know, people are reblogging on their Tumblr, right? And so a lot of people are still using these different platforms to get ideas and to save things. And so what are some ways that applies to your content, I think is always really insightful, because you always want to think, you know, when it comes to like content, when I'm in a situation to have the time to plan out content, I always try to think about like, what is the value that this content will bring? Is it funny? Is it engaging? Is it inspirational? Is it something that could potentially help other people? So I think these are all things that, you know, you should think about when like, why am I making this content, and why would people like it?
So I love this. I actually just dropped this on the screen because it's so good. This is a pro tip straight from Monica. What are people saving and sharing? You heard it here first. Think about saves and shares over the traditional comments and likes that I think we've all been focused on so heavily. Such a cool way of thinking about things. Monica, where can people find you on the internet?
The platform I spend the most time on is probably Instagram, which I have not been on it as much lately because I've been so busy. But my Instagram is @Thundercup. It's on the name down there. And I think my LinkedIn and my Twitter and everything should pop up if you type in Thundercup.
Perfect. So thank you again, Monica, for joining us for Build Your Brand. Super insightful, super interesting stuff. As once again, I'd like to thank my sponsor, Restream, for sponsoring this and letting us go across so many different awesome, cool platforms and getting comments and questions across all those platforms. Thank you guys. I'll see you next week for another Build Your Brand. Bye.